Today we're going to talk about the feed portion of the silage zone, and the overall theme will be about how we manage variation. It's so critical. We've got so many different examples of variation that we're going to go through. We're going to talk about how we manage that variation by sampling, tracking, and then adjusting for it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about making sure that that total mixed ration is really a total mixed ration where we've done a great job of managing that variation. And why are we doing this? We all know that if we're consistent in what we put in front of our cows, they're going to produce really well for us. So we're going to talk again about how we manage variation and look at some of the examples across soils, byproducts, even variation between laboratory results, and then talk a little bit about forages and rations and how we manage those. So this first slide shows just a good example of how much variation there can be within one field, not only from topography standpoint, but soil structure, water holding capacity, organic matter, and all of those have an effect on what we end up with for a feed. That points to a great reason why we're trying to encourage people to utilize a program like Encirca to manage that variation across the field and accommodate it. The next slide shows a study that was done at the University of Missouri where they did sampling of byproducts over a set amount of time and showed just how variable they were depending on when that load came in. For example, look at the coefficient of variation on corn gluten feed, 28.1% on the fat percent, 12.7% under distillers for its coefficient of variation on fat. Look at the starch differences on corn gluten feed, 19% coefficient of variation, 24% on rice bran. Tremendous amounts of variation that we just have to accommodate. The next thing we did is we did a study that looked at the variation between lab analyses. We went to 4 dairies and collected BMR samples. Samples were shipped into Pioneer, ground to a uniform size, and then sent off to 4 different labs for analysis. You can see here across the 4 farms on the bottom, 1, 2, 3, and 4, the labs were A, B, C, and D. When they analyzed the same samples, A was the same sample in each lab, tremendous amount of variation on what they got for a result for 24-hour NDFD. Now, when we went to a 48-hour NDFD, that variation got to be less, but still, the take-home message is find a lab that you're comfortable with, stay with that lab so that the analyses that they're using is the same time over time. A summary that was done back in 2003 on several dairies where they sampled the haylage piles and the corn silage piles again shows the tremendous amount of range that we can have. Look at the dry matter variation. Smallest deviation was 5.2 up to almost 45% on the haylage. Corn silage 1.3% all the way up to 55%. And the same thing can be done on the crude protein with the haylage, NDF on both the haylage and corn silage. So again, we just have to recognize that there's a tremendous amount of variation there that we have to accommodate. And the only way we can do that is by sampling, tracking, and then adjusting for it. Dan Bollinger did a nice study up in Michigan where he looked at a large pile of corn silage, over 1,000 acres with numerous hybrids in it. So he sampled it all across the face. He looked at several things. What I'm showing you here on the next slide is a percent dry matter. There was a range of almost 9 points in the dry matter of the samples that he took. The next slide shows that the NDFD, again, a large range, all the way from 38 up to 51. When they faced that silage and brought it down, and sampled those from the whole face across the bottom, you can see that it reduced the range by quite a bit on the dry matter, down to 2.5 points. And when they did it on the NDFD, it also reduced that range of variation by quite a bit. The next one I want to show you is variations in stored feed that they found on a haylage pile done by Olberg and Stone, where they went across the face and looked at the crude protein samples. There was a 7.1% range just going across the face in various points. When they defaced it and brought it down, then you can see that it shortened up that range to 4.7%. And when they actually brought it together with the loader tractor, dumping it to where it got mixed well, they ended up with just a 2.5% range. So their sample is going to be a lot closer to what the average is for that pile if it's done correctly. So whenever we sample, no matter what it is, whether it's hay or grain or byproducts or silages, we always want to get 15 to 20 scoops, especially on the silage that we're scooping with our hands, not grabbing, that we get it thoroughly mixed in a bucket, and then we pour it out to where it can be quartered and looked at closely by taking the opposing quarters and putting those together for the next sample to be sent in. This slide shows that exact procedure and what we can do with that. Here's just a real close example. I'll use a drywall knife, and all I do is come in after I've collected my sample and mixed it in my bucket. I pour it out here, and I just simply separate it with that into force. Get those separated well. And then once I have them separated, I take the opposing quarters and move those apart. Keep the two that are opposing each other. Get that over here, bring those together, and then that becomes part of my sample that I send in for analysis. So again, it's really important that we do this correctly, and one of the biggest ones that we have to look at on the farm, especially with our stored forages, is going to be dry matter. Because if we get that wrong, it throws the whole ration off. We would suggest that we're doing dry matters on silages at least once a week, maybe even daily if you think it's changing a lot. And from a nutrient standpoint, when you're sending it in for crude protein and all the other analytical measures, probably doing that at least monthly or 2 times a month. Going back to the moisture, there's a lot of different ways you can do it on the farm. You could use a Koster tester, a food dehydrator, if you have an NIR machine like a Harvest Lab, or what we suggest is probably the easiest, as you can see on this slide, is a microwave, where we're taking a 100-gram sample, putting it on a plate with a glass of water in there, run it for 4 minutes, take it out, reweigh it, do that again and again for another 30 seconds at a time until that weight stops. Then you have your calculation where you know what the dry matter is. There's an old saying from a nutritional standpoint that there's 3 rations on every farm. There's the one that the nutritionist puts together that spends a lot of time getting it just right. There's the one that gets fed. And then the third one is the ones the cows actually eat. And we try to make sure that that first one that the nutritionist is doing is as close as we can get it to what the cows are eating. We do that by making sure that we sample that TMR occasionally, see how close it analyzes to what the nutritionist is putting together. And then another important part is making sure that that wagon is delivering what we think it should by doing a TMR audit, where we simply go along the bunk line right after it's been fed, take 10 equally placed samples, run them through the Penn State forage particle separator, see how close of a variation they have between those 10 spots. We want the variation on the second 2 boxes to be within 3% or less. Not on the top screen, but on the bottom 2. If we can get less than 3%, we know that the feed wagon's doing a great job. And if the TMR that we send in for analysis at the lab comes back within very close parameters of what that nutritionist is formulating, we feel good about what the cows are receiving. So again, we've got to recognize the sources of variation, whether it's in the field, and try to manage that with a program like Encirca. We got to look at what we're bringing in for byproducts and doing a regular sampling on those and finding a consistent source. We want to find a lab that's doing a great job with their analysis and stay with it. And then once we've done all those things, we want to make sure that what we're delivering to the cows is as close to what the nutritionist is formulating by sending in that TMR for analysis and then doing a TMR on occasion.
That concludes this Pioneer Growing Point Agronomy video podcast. Visit our page on pioneer.com and follow us on Twitter and Facebook for more agronomy insights.